So I guess we are going to kick off first. I think more people probably will drop in, but then I'm first going to give a quick introduction about Anchor Taiwan and a bit of updates in terms of what we have been up to. And afterwards, obviously, I'm going to share about my recent observations and learnings. Obviously, been to quite a few demo days virtually these days. So I'm going to share a little bit about best practices that I observe and things that I saw that we might be able to sort of like ponder or sort of like learn from. And afterwards, we're gonna go into a Q&A session. And then we will have breakout sessions for people online in the Zoom session to connect with each other. So I guess let's get started. And throughout the event and also after the event, if you want to share your experience, feel free to use hashtag Anchor Taiwan so we can find your post and interact with you. So feel free to do that so that we can stay connected. Are we ready? Can we see some hands so that I know everybody is alive? Fantastic, thank you so much. If you know me, you know that usually I'm someone who loves interaction. So, you know, like I'm getting used to this kind of online session because I cannot really interact much yet, like not as the in-person session. So, but I can see you. So if you wave, you know, like that will give me some motivation. So that's fantastic. Thank you so much. All right. So first, because, you know, like with this session, we actually get over 150 signups. And I believe that I saw actually a lot of new names. So first, I'm going to take a few minutes to introduce what we do at Anchor Taiwan. For those of you who are already our supporters, thank you again for joining us. Really, you know, like you gave us a lot of motivation and reason to keep doing what we do. So let's do that. So essentially for Anchor, our mission is to connect the world with Taiwan through entrepreneurship. I have lived and worked in a lot of places in the world, and very often I just feel like, how come not more people know about our talent, our industry, our startups here in Taiwan? So in 2017, I created this platform called Anchor Taiwan, really with the aim to introduce Taiwan to more people and also to sort of like hopefully lead a global conversation about what Asia has to offer and what Taiwan can provide for products, services, companies that are really making the world better. So, you know, like that's the essential mission with Anchor. But in reality, how do we do that? Well, I believe that the best way to get to know Taiwan is to bring people over, because very often Taiwan sells itself. Very often when we bring entrepreneurs, investors, and tech professionals over, they just fell in love with this place. So essentially, from 2017, we started hosting entrepreneurial residencies and innovation sprints, hosting basically entrepreneurs from YC 500 startups, and also tech executives from Microsoft, Intel, Uber, Dell, so on and so forth. A lot of brilliant people came to Taiwan through our program, and you know that's definitely one of the best parts of my job. So far, we have built a lot of partnerships, both in Taiwan and also throughout the world. And we host a lot of events like, well, usually in person to connect this world talent with the communities here in Taiwan. So we have engaged with thousands and thousands of people in person. And obviously through our various social media channels, we engage with a lot of people with news, information about tech startup ecosystem here in Taiwan. And just a quick nutshell in terms of the things that we have been through since the inception of the program. You can see there's a lot of IoT, hardware, there's a bit of blockchain, 5G, supply chain, urban tech. Basically, we try to identify areas where Taiwan can basically provide value for investors and entrepreneurs from around the world. And as I mentioned, we have got a lot of great people in our community. So far, we have actually got alumni from more than 15 countries in the world. And some of these people ended up moving to Taiwan to start their own company or joining other corporations. And some of them return to their home countries, but hopefully bring back both the memory, knowledge, and information about this amazing place called Taiwan. So basically what we do, we try to position ourselves to be a team, a platform from Taiwan, but for the world. So essentially, we want to really be this bridge, not only with Taiwan, but also kind of like how do we position Taiwan so that we can lead this conversation and collaboration for the greater China, greater Southeast Asia as well. We are very value and community driven, so we host a lot of events. We so far are completely privately funded, so there's no government funding yet in this program. It's completely driven by the private sector and the community members, such as you. And we are actually multidisciplinary. So, one thing special about us is that we believe in order to introduce Taiwan, we need to really operate at the intersection of technology, culture, and venture. We think a lot about how do we curate the experience so that our members get to really witness the best, not only in terms of our tech industry, but also our people, our culture, so that they can do business, they can basically further their startups, but at the same time, they also get to connect with awesome people like many of you here in Taipei. And here, as I said, we have hosted a lot of events. If you're interested in joining us again, hopefully soon after this whole pandemic is over, in person, feel free to check out our Facebook and Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Usually that's where you can find upcoming events where you can sign up and meet more people in person, hopefully soon. All right, and I want to talk a little bit in terms of the early stage investments that we started doing from last year. So as I mentioned, we started running the program from 2017. But for the first 2 years, we pretty much focused completely on creating the best experiences possible for our members. Even though I came from a late stage investment background, we didn't start doing investment right away because we wanted to make sure that we build this platform, we have the right resources to basically help our members succeed. But from last year, we started seeing that, hey, some of our people started moving here, they started getting good traction. And we believe that early stage investment is also a very important part to make the Taiwan startup ecosystem better. So from last year, we started Anchor Venture Partners, essentially an early stage investment platform with capital from us internally at the moment to invest in international teams. So essentially with startups with a Taiwan angle that we ideally would be able to basically persuade to come to Taiwan to work with talents and industries here, but at the same time, very often targeting and aiming for the global markets. And so far we have done some deals. Usually our check size is in between 10 to 100,000. We're still early in building this platform. So obviously we'll love more conversations and collaborations with many of you in the audience. And the reason that we're hosting this tonight is also because since we started building this, we have been privileged to attend some of the best demo days in the world and started basically learning and also getting into deal flow, connecting with other co-investors and so on and so forth. And we believe that this might be valuable for some of our community members to also learn about what's going on in Silicon Valley at the moment. What are accelerators doing over there? Our startups basically focusing on a particular sector. So basically, the reason for us to run this session, a huge part, is to really share that knowledge and to create this conversation. So hopefully we can encourage more people to get into the early stage investment ecosystem. So here, let's get started. By the way, if you have any question, feel free to put it in the Slido, or if you want, put it in the chat room and we'll try our best to answer them. So I will give you a quick nutshell in terms of what I'm going to cover. First, I'm going to share a little bit in terms of, because now it's April already, a lot of reports with the first quarter 2020 situations and numbers are out. So first, I'm going to go through on the very macro level, what's going on in the world, especially when it comes to startup investing and funding. And then afterwards, I'm going to essentially use 500 startups and YC as case studies to share about my most recent experiences with them, best practices that I learned and, startups over there that I have observed and trends and so on and so forth. And afterwards, we're gonna go into maybe some takeaway to see, what we can do from here. So first of all, with this, by the way, I'm going to have a lot of graphs, but don't be scared. I'll try to walk you through and point you to the main points. I would say if you ask me or a lot of people in the venture space, in the early stage space, venture funding space, what happened in the first quarter in 2020, I would say, like this feels like the calm before the storm. So if you look at this graph, first, if you focus on that green bar, you will see that's basically the value of the amount of investing basically into various stages of private companies. And you can see, if you look at the green bar, like here, I don't know if you can see my mouse. From 2019 into the first quarter, in terms of the value, the amount, we're still relatively robust. So, like obviously the first quarter just ended not long ago. So the impact might be actually coming up, but then value-wise, it seems like we're relatively stable. However, if you look at this blue line, then it tells a little bit different story. So you will see that here we started seeing a sharp decline in terms of number of deals. So that's the first thing interesting to see. And I have a few other graphs that we can actually go through for you to basically see this more clearly. So here again, a different report. This one is from CB Insights. If we look at the number of deals, and here you will see we have basically different sizes from seed to series A, B, C, D, and E mega deals. You will see from this one, if you see this kind of like this bloody red curve, the huge decline actually mainly comes from the seed stage. So early stage investing, at least in the first quarter in 2020, is seeing basically the biggest decrease. Then how about the deal value? Here we'll be able to see again, if we focus on this Q1 2020 space, we will see that actually the amount stays relatively stable. If we look at from the right hand side of the screen, seed level, it's basically 2.4 million. And it stays still relatively stable, but obviously again, because this is only for the first quarter, and then I actually expect a more pronounced reset due to the COVID-19 will be coming in the second quarter and after, especially because in the world, especially in the States and also Europe, we didn't really quite feel or the impact as much yet in the numbers. And this is also another graph that I think is interesting to see. So if we look at the world and if we divide that into three chunks, US, Europe, and Asia, we will see that the biggest decline actually comes from the Asian region, this where the blue arrow is. And I think if you think about how the pandemic broke out and how the lockdowns and so on and so forth were in place, that's relatively easy and straightforward to imagine. So this is just kind of a quick nutshell in terms of overall on the macro level globally what's going on in the early stage. Obviously, there's tons and tons of information, a lot of great reports coming out. We can share those in our event page afterwards if you're interested in downloading the entire reports to read through the whole thing. But today, I'm not going to go into a lot of details with this, a lot of awesome reports out there that you can read. I'm going to basically walk you through a little bit more in terms of, I guess, my personal experience, as well as my direct observations with particularly YC and 500 startups. So what happened this March in San Francisco? First of all, I'm not sure if all of you are familiar with YC and 500 startups. Can I give get a quick show of hands? If you are super familiar with both, can you show both hands? And if you're familiar with one, show me one hand. If you're not familiar with either of them, well, I guess stay put. Oh, I see Eric now. Hey, Chester. Hello, awesome. Wow, okay, so wow. Philip, I love that thing. Fantastic. Great. So, well, I think, some of you are relatively familiar. Some of you probably are still new to this. That's totally okay, because that's basically one of the main reasons for me to want to share this with you. So before we go in, usually for YC and 500 startups, typically in March and also August, they host these like huge demo days. These were actually pictures that I took from last year. And it's like one of the most anticipated events in the startup world. And I love being there as well, like seeing new companies, connecting with founders and connecting with, other co-investors as well. Obviously, this is not happening. And I'm going to basically give you like this front row seat view in terms of what happened last month. Just very quick parameters so that you have some ideas in terms of the differences in between these two. So YC started in 2005, pretty established already. Their typical standard terms is 150,000 for 7%. They don't charge any program fee, so that's 150,000 entirely for investment in exchange for 7% through this instrument that they created called SAFE. It's a 3-month program, and they do encourage people to move to the Bay Area. Usually, as I mentioned, they run 2 batches per year. And they actually announced recently that the upcoming cohort will be entirely remote. And then, by the way, some of the big companies that came out of YC, like why are they so famous? Well, because some of the most successful startups came through their program, and they were able to identify those unicorns relatively early on. Like when they wrote the 150,000 checks, very often they're the first institutional money. So being able to find the right team so early on and bet them and help them succeed, obviously that's something that a lot of founders would dream for. So Stripe, say for example, Airbnb, Instacart, Coinbase, Dropbox, DoorDash, these are some of the companies that went through YC before. Obviously, there's tons of them. There's actually a page on their homepage that you can actually scroll through all of these great companies that came out of their program. So now let's move to sort of like the right-hand side. Then you will see for 500 startups, few years sort of like younger. They started in 2010. Also very established. Their typical term is they invest in 150,000 in exchange for 6%. So percentage-wise, it seems lower, but do remember that they charge a 37.5 thousand program fee. The program is a little bit longer, and this is also new. They just actually recently announced during the demo day that now, instead of running 2 fixed cohorts, they're gonna take applications on the rolling basis. So, like you can apply whenever, and then they will review your application. If you're in, then you can select which demo day you want to present your company. So that's also something new that they're trying. Some awesome companies also came out of the 500 startup accelerators. Some of my favorite ones actually, like say for example, Canva. I cannot live without that. And I made this deck actually with Canva, by the way. Twilio, by the way, another companies that I really like, like last time during the conference, I got this like really awesome notebook. But anyway, some of the great companies, Credit Karma, Grab, Intercom, Udemy, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of like quick introduction in terms of just like background parameters so that you have some idea. All right, now let's look at what happened in March. So some of you might know that basically I was traveling through from Hawaii, New York, DC, Toronto to San Francisco the entire February. We got a lot of overseas events and speaking engagements. So basically in March, I was in San Francisco originally waiting for this like exciting YC and 500 demo days. But obviously, that didn't happen. So what happened? March 4th, first thing in the morning, I got an email from the CEO of YC. They sent out a survey for all of the investors invited to the demo day, basically asking about our plans due to the COVID-19 outbreak, whether we still plan to attend the demo day, whether we'll be traveling from somewhere else. Obviously, now it's kind of like a norm. People sort of like expect that we're not traveling and everything's virtual. But I need to take you back kind of like more than a month, like almost 2 months ago. At that time, like we were still, especially in the States, getting into this thing, like, is this gonna be a thing or is it gonna just die out? We didn't know yet. So that morning I got that survey and I remember I filled it out, not knowing what will happen. I didn't know whether I should like book my tickets and come back because it's safer in Taiwan. I didn't know whether, being on the plane will actually increase the risk for me and so on and so forth. But I filled out the survey and I sent it out. And then on the same day, 500 startup also announced that they're going to move their demo day, originally scheduled to be March 19. They're going to move that completely virtual, completely online. So it will be a digital experience. And at the same time, they also announced that they are going to postpone that by a week. I suppose they probably want more time for their founders to also prepare for this like virtual sort of like pitch session as well. So I sent the survey out, and 2 days afterwards, YC also announced that they're gonna do the demo day online. But what's interesting for me was that the next week, so the next Tuesday on March 10th, YC came out again. They basically made this announcement that, hey, in addition to moving our demo day online, we are also going to do the demo day 1 week earlier. So, you know, like for me, that was very interesting, especially among a lot of these uncertainties. Obviously, my reading into this was that at the time, the pandemic was hitting. There was more and more uncertainty. So my read into this is that they wanted to get this down. They wanted to basically kind of like put their founders out there so that they can close the deals earlier. Because, you know, like if really shit hit the fan, it's gonna get tougher and tougher and tougher to raise money. So obviously, I cannot say on their behalf, but then, you know, like I thought that was something interesting to notice. So originally the demo day was on the 23rd and 24th. Now it's 1 week earlier on the 19th. And another interesting thing is also that for their demo day, there was actually no video. It's completely just kind of like, they have this like very sophisticated and robust online portal, but then there's no video. It's not like the typical YC demo day where you will actually see the founder's pitch. It's essentially just kind of like you go there and there's like this slides and then a few sentences about the company, and then you essentially need to make the decision in terms of whether you want to further the conversation with the founders. So that's sort of like a big overview in terms of what happened in March. Obviously now it's very easy for me to just kind of like go through this. During that whole month, you know, like I was moving around in San Francisco because originally I wasn't sure about my travel plan. And then you know, as soon as YC announced that they're gonna go online, I booked my tickets immediately and came back to Taiwan. And just for the sake of safety for my family and for Taiwan, I went into self-quarantine for 14 days. So like a lot happened in March. And during that whole time, I went to the YC demo day and the 500 started demo day in Taiwan, from Taiwan virtually. So now I want to share with you, I guess, some numbers, both from the current batch and also because for YC, I have been going for a few times. They also publish their batch statistics online. So I think it's interesting actually to see sort of like the trends from the numbers about the startups that they invest into. The first thing that I want to draw your attention to is the number of companies. Some of you might not be aware that now there are almost 200 companies in the YC batch. To be precise, there are 197 companies in the previous cohort that just ended last month. And, you know, like in addition to seeing the total number of companies, if you look at this, you know, like basically this bar, the total number is the number of companies at each YC's batch from essentially summer 2017. We can see that, you know, like basically the cohort has been getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But another thing that I love to observe and to track is how many of these companies are actually from outside of the US. Obviously, because I care a lot about Asian, I care a lot about, are other emerging markets getting more active? What are the other founders doing, you know, like in other parts of the world? So that's another number that I look at very closely. And if we look at that number here, you will see basically this darker blue bar represents the percentage of the number of companies based outside of the US. So you can see that we are actually at a recent low in terms of the overall percentage. So in terms of the total company, it's the biggest batch ever for YC. But then for companies with founders coming outside of the US, this is actually relatively low compared with the most recent other batches. The last one and the one before, you can see here at this table, typically they're almost 40%. Almost 40% of the founders. So like more than 1/3 of the founders in the last and the one before batches, they were from different parts of the world. But This time, the number is relatively low. Obviously, you know, like I can only give reasoning through what I'm seeing. I think the US sort of like immigration policy, I have heard actually with personal stories and so on and so forth, that it has been more difficult for foreign founders to basically get into the States. Sometimes even I have heard stories about founders got into YC, but not being able to get into the States for the program. So that's probably one reason, but obviously love to get your thoughts if you have any sort of like guess or insights in terms of why the percentage of the non-US companies is dropping quite dramatically actually for the current cohorts. Another thing that sort of like just to go into a little bit further details in terms of, okay, with this meaningful percentage of companies coming from around the world, what's the breakdown? So here I list out basically the percentage so that you kind of like get an idea. One very obvious trend is that for Indian companies, it's definitely getting more and more sort of like traction. So last batch, last August, September, well, last demo day when I was in San Francisco, there were 11 companies from India. This cohort more than double, 24. So more than 10% of the YC companies actually come from India, obviously one of the biggest markets in the world. And then another 10% actually comes from places that a lot of Taiwanese people may not be very familiar with, Latin. But again, another huge market over there. And interestingly, I also see in the recent sort of like cohorts, the startup and companies from Africa is also increasing. Now we have about 7% in the current cohorts from Africa. Again, I think that's also an area that a lot of Taiwanese businesses and talents may not be super familiar with. But in my opinion, it will be, you know, pretty important to watch that trend and to see, you know, like what kind of companies are coming out of there. For Asia and for Europe, usually like about like 4 or 5%. So that's sort of like the number this batch. One thing interesting to see is that overall for companies basically targeting emerging markets, now it's about 1/3, so almost 30%. And one trend in terms of the type of companies coming out of the US is that very often they will take proven business model and they basically localize for their markets. So some examples that I have seen recently, so for example, we have Pinduoduo, obviously super successful from China. We have seen founders building that for India. We have got SoFi, super successful, and there were founders building that for Latin, Stripe for the Philippines, Robinhood for Indonesia, and so on and so forth. There are tons of sort of like examples like this. So that shows that, hey, you know, like if you don't have something completely original, but if you can take an idea that works or like a business model that works, but if you're able to localize well enough with your technology or your connections or local know-how, you know, that's still very powerful. All right. Another thing that I care a lot about is diversity and also just kind of like female founders and female sort of like investors. So how is YC doing? Well, I'm basically, I couldn't really find the number for that 27 sort of like cohort. So basically the current cohort, there were about 11% female founders. Obviously, you know, like still far from the 50% world average population that's female. But it fluctuates a little bit, basically still usually under 20%. And that's something that I do hope to see sort of like more in the future. And another area that I love observing is, okay, with all these companies that YC invested into, remember that, you know, like being in the YC cohorts isn't that, oh, it's cool. You know, that means YC actually putting 150,000 into each of these companies. So I love observing what categories are they looking at. Not that, you know, like we should just copy that, but I think it's an interesting insight. So again, I will walk you through how to read these graphs. First of all, you know, like we have timeline from 2017 summer all the way to this most recent cohorts. If we look across the board, you will see the highest bar is this blue bar, which represents the B2B SaaS kind of like categories. So basically consistently, especially in recent years, usually over 30%, almost sometimes even almost 40% of the companies actually are in these categories. And we also, you know, like the next graph, we're able to see sort of like more insights in terms of the trends and the changes of different categories. But one thing that I also usually always check is how about the hardware sector? Well, because of Taiwan's sort of like strengths in the supply chain. So usually I always look at, okay, how many companies are in the hardware space? Well, not that many. So out of the 197 companies, this cohort, there were only 15. So basically like even under 8%, roughly 8% of the companies that's in the hardware space. And by the way, all of them only have male founders. I didn't find a single female founders in that space, which is a little bit sad. I hope to see more. But anyway, so over this last few cohorts, another thing is also that I noticed that for hardware, either it's just not big enough. Like the previous number that I got is in 2017, there were 18%. So basically dropping from 18% to now 8%. In between, there was not even data or stats about that. Usually, like after each YC demo day, they will publish their batch stats. But then during the cohorts in between, there were not even a category called hardware. So that's just to give you kind of like a quick idea. Another way to look at the same set of numbers, but that's look at the trends. So again, this blue line is B2B SaaS. Obviously, it's basically on the rise, a lot of interest around that. And I also noticed that in the current cohorts, there's a lot of sort of like buzzwords or like investors basically talking about developer tools or productivity tools. This was before the pandemic. Obviously, this whole thing is making this sector even like hotter. So like a lot of investors are focusing on these areas. Future of work is another buzzword that I think in Taiwan, I haven't really seen a lot of people talking about this yet. And another thing interesting to observe is that during the recent cohorts, originally, at least there were like 2 to 3, that there was a category called blockchain. Now that's completely gone. I think, like in the current cohorts, not that there were no company working on blockchain, but people don't tend to sort of like emphasize that as much anymore. And one thing interesting to see is that there's quite a lot of fintech companies. So, and in addition to that, if you look at this like green bar over here, you will see that this green bar is also on the rise. And in addition to kind of like having a bigger percentage, also more than 50%, more than half of those companies are targeting non-US markets. And here I have a quick breakdown for you to kind of like get a sense in terms of which markets are providing these tools for their countries. So 8 of them from India, and 5 of them targeting Latin, 4 in Africa, and 2 in Southeast Asia. So hopefully that will give you also like some ideas in terms of the fintech startups in that space. And just to sort of like further conclude some trends that, some of these are my personal observations and some of these are actually from the YC blog. One thing that I am seeing is that there are more and more startups basically revamping traditional industries or servicing existing businesses. And for me, I think this is great news because in Taiwan, we have so many small, medium businesses. And I have always been kind of like a big advocate to basically encourage the small, medium businesses or the existing sort of like corporates, the traditional industries in Taiwan, we call a lot of them hidden champions in Xinguanjun, for them to work more with startups. And finally, now more and more, including YC startups, are targeting this space. So I think that's very exciting to watch. And then especially, among this sector, there's also a more and more sort of like interest along the supply chain as well. So that's obviously also great for Taiwan. And one thing to keep in mind though, is that usually in the US or in Europe, usually when we talk about supply chain, that's broadly defined, a lot of time focusing more on the logistics overall. So not necessarily like very manufacturing heavy kind of like supply chain that usually when we talk about supply chain, going in Lian here in Taiwan, it's all about factories, like semiconductor and so on and so forth. But very often in the US, my personal experience is that sometimes I talk to someone, maybe like a co-investor about, oh yeah, we look at supply chain and like 30 minutes afterwards, we realized that we're actually talking as slightly different things. They're all intertwined and obviously, you know, like very important for both the logistics and then the manufacturing to work. But, you know, do keep in mind that in the US and also rest of the world, people might have a little bit of different interpretation in terms of what that is. And I'm seeing quite a bit of housing and sustainability startups. Obviously, that's great to see as well with Anchor. You know, like we had this circular economy cohort last year, and that's going to be basically part of our focus area going forwards as well. And we also see, you know, remember that we talk about the developer tools and productivity tools, and specifically, we're actually seeing quite a lot of tools designed for non-technical workers. So say, for example, data science used to be super technical, but now more and more people are building maybe kind of like, in a way, data science for dummies. Like anyone without coding experience would be able to just kind of like use the tool to solve their issues. So there's like more and more tools like that. And obviously quite a lot of consumers and a lot of like kind of like parenting tools also coming up as well. So, you know, with all of this, and arguably the best accelerators in the world, right? How are startups actually doing? Keep in mind that the demo day was sort of like mid-March. And, you know, like now this is obviously a very trying time, very tricky. A lot of people are still adjusting to this new normal, and it's also relatively recent as well. Some of the companies that I spoke with after demo day, they're sort of like closing this or next week. So this obviously cannot represent all of the companies that have closed their deals, but then just to kind of like some reference points. So this is a public record from Crunchbase for YC. And again, this doesn't represent, you know, out of the 197 companies which have been founded. If you want to do that, you probably need to basically go through all of them and see, you know, like whether they have announced their new round. I have checked maybe kind of like 30 of them. And so far, most of them still had that 150,000 initial funding from YC, which means either they're still closing or, you know, like they haven't published their most recent funding news. But we do see at least a few companies manage to close. Layla, say for example, I actually knew about that company. It's actually a Canadian company. It's a female founder, so obviously got more attention from me. They closed at 1.4 million. I put this here also to give you an idea in terms of, for those that close, what sort of like level are they, you know, like did they raise? So 1.4, 2.2 million, 3.5 million. There are a lot of other companies in between. Those are usually companies that went through YC before, that YC put in follow-on capital. So this obviously is not kind of like a complete list, but I put it here so that you can sort of like get a sense in terms of where things are. All right, now let's switch gear a little bit and get into 500 startup. By the way, do we have any, all right. Wow, you know, obviously when I talk, I couldn't really see the chat. Well, I see Pin asking, would you fund me if I do? But I need to read through all of this. I'll come back to this with my wine later. But now I will go through this presentation first. So now let's change gear a little bit. And by the way, did I mention that I'm gonna have a quiz in the end? And whoever you get
I'm
the right
so dying to get that prize.
We'll get it. Wow. Well, Penelope, I'm not sure if you're allowed to participate, but we'll see.
Not fair.
All right, let's switch gear a little bit and talk about 500 startups. I don't have enough time, so I'm gonna just quickly run through this, and I'm not able to basically go into the same level of details, but obviously we can further this conversation some other time. So again, a quick nutshell in terms of the current batch. 500 Startup is a much smaller program. So it's each cohort, 29 companies. But, you know, like they picked a company from over 3,000 applications. So less than 1% acceptance rates. Still very difficult to get into, and, you know, with very good reputation around the world. Very different experience, I suppose, for the founders, you know, like to get into a cohort with 20 something other startups versus almost 200. Then, you know, like you probably get a different size of cohort experience, but at the same time, maybe kind of like different time and resources allocation and so on and so forth. But so I guess for founders out there, you probably just need to sort of like evaluate and think about which one suits you the most. Here, they still have about almost 37% of the companies coming from outside of the US. One thing to note is that for 500, actually for their investment, originally, like to begin with, their fund, their capital, more than 50% actually come from outside of the States. So, like you're probably familiar, they actually have a lot of LPs from around the world. So I think with that, they probably have kind of like, they're more inclined to also, they have a lot of this like building connections. And so at the moment, still almost 40% of the companies are from outside of the States. And 30% of the companies have a female founder. So pretty awesome to see slightly better diversity over here. And from my experience, I also feel like 500, they also have a pretty diverse sort of like entrepreneurs sort of like base. So 70% of the startups have one or more founders who identify themselves as a racial minority. So this is sort of like a quick overview. And so I want to talk a little bit about my experience with 500. I have to say, I think so far, among all of this digital online demo day that I have been to, I think 500 startups so far, I have to say, I really had an amazing experience. And let me tell you why. So if you remember previously, like they postponed their demo day by 1 week. I suppose that probably also gave them, like more time to get this ready. But one thing that I really, really love, and just to give you some sort of like background information. So the demo day was pre-recorded. Each founders, they had this like clips recorded already to avoid technical sort of like difficulties and issues. But they have a real-time session on YouTube. So on YouTube, basically you can interact with others, there's live chats and so on and so forth. But the recording, the pitch itself was pre-recorded. But the best part about the demo day experience was that before the demo day, 500 startups, they created an online virtual Slack space. So they basically invited all of these investors into the Slack channels where we could basically introduce ourselves and connect with others before the actual demo day. And in my opinion, that was just kind of like one of the best things that they have created. And in terms of the facilitation in the Slack channels and what they have sort of like thought through in terms of guiding people to connect each other, even just kind of like virtually on Slack, it was really done brilliantly. The teams over there, I have to give it to them. It was really well done. And I remember in the Slack channel for the investors, they were easily over 1,000 investors over there introducing each other. I met a lot of brilliant people and, like two very noticeable trends. I met a lot of CBCs, especially from two categories. One is fintech related, so from banks, from insurance companies, and another huge categories is automotive. So a lot of cars, basically these days, all coming to Silicon Valley to look for the best ideas and to basically find the right teams to help them either build autonomous vehicles, electric EVs, and so on and so forth. So I have to say, that whole Slack channel experience, and they decided to keep it live because a lot of investors had the same feedback that it basically really allowed them to identify who in the future that they can work with. And then, like after the demo day, I have had so many, you have no idea, so many conversations with other investors. And then we have discussed companies that, like we dislike and why, and so on and so forth, and share deal flows. So that was really, really valuable. I'm super thankful that they created that. And, like for us, we also try to learn from that as well, because, I still believe that for community building, it doesn't matter whether it's online or offline. Obviously, with this online experience, there's more thought that we have to put in to facilitate people's experience. But I have to say, I had a brilliant experience with 500. So that's a lot of information. I hope you're all still awake. We still have more than 50 people online, so I guess that's good news. Now what? Now I have basically give you some information about my personal experience, my personal observations, and now what? I want to share maybe two things. We can talk more during the Q&A session and also kind of like later on in the breakout session. But I want to share two main things here. One is that this whole pandemic situation really gave Taiwan this unique and very special opportunity for the world to see us. And this is really, I have to say, like being a founder of an organization trying to promote Taiwan. Before all of this, very often we go to places that a lot of people don't really know much about who we are, what we're up to, and so on and so forth. This spotlight is really a golden opportunity for us to share with the world who we are, what we are up to, and what we can do. So the world is watching. And I think it's also important to remember that I think because of our special sort of like political situation, I think sometimes we're like, whoa, finally we got all this attention. But I think it's also important, and I would like to invite our community to think a little bit more as well. When the whole world is suffering and when we're doing relatively okay here, what can we do? And, like, in addition to celebrating our own success, always remember the compassion and empathy and how other people are still suffering, people are still dying. But I think it's important to remember that and also get ready. Like when all of this is over, are we there to grab the opportunity either for the supply chain? Is the talent in Taiwan ready to work or to join the teams, like from other parts of the world? I think that's the question that at least I ask myself, I ask my team, and I ask our partners a lot. And I would like to also invite you to think about that as well. Another thing to also notice is that obviously, like stock market has been going crazy, the oil price and so on and so forth. A lot of people think about and talk about, hey, what's going to happen in the startup sort of like fundraising, especially for founders who are raising out there. Are you going to be able to get through this? It's obviously a very challenging time, and I think founders will have to do whatever it takes. Either, I have got funders, I have seen them cut the salary and also just really cut down the cost and try to get through this. But I guess the silver lining of this is that there's like a lot of dry powder out there ready to be deployed. So to give you an actual sort of, and like I love information backed by data. So that's actually look at the data to see where we are. If we look at the chart first, this is the global venture fundraising trends from 2012 to 2020. I wish I could find something, like that covers the number in 2007, 2008, so that we can compare with the current situation with the last big financial crisis, where we are in terms of the level, but I couldn't find that for now. If you have that information, I would love to see, please get in touch with me. But if we look at this now, we will see, like for 2020 here, obviously on the right hand side of this graph, obviously this is only kind of like the first quarter of number, and it's still going strong. Obviously, we don't know whether this is gonna last. But then if we look at this specific funds on the left-hand side, some of the biggest and most successful venture capital funds in the world, now they have a lot of money to deploy. And remember, these are professional fund managers. They cannot just sit on their money, because that's gonna basically affect their returns, and there's a whole calculation that goes into this. So, a few names that you might be familiar with, NEA, they just closed, like in March, 3.6 billion. Insight Partners, 9.5 billion. KPCB also have another fund focusing on early stage, 700 million. Lightspeed Venture Partners, over 4 billion. And Index Ventures, 2.8. Even in Asia, like this more like China-focused Qinin, also closed 1.1 billion. All of this were in March and April. And I only list out the big ones. There are obviously tons of other smaller ones that I haven't listed out yet. What I wanted to say is that, it's difficult time, and it doesn't mean that they're gonna invest right away, because a very common sentiment, especially these days when I talk to other people who are also looking at deals, is that we want to invest, like we still have resources, but at the same time, we're like, but will valuation drop further? Do I have really kind of like enough sort of like enough belief in these funders to just kind of like bet him or her at this level no matter what? So I think investors will take longer to make investment decision, and then so expect that, and that's completely normal. But then just know that a lot of funds out there, they have money to deploy. And I think the message that I want to leave is when they're ready, I hope you, us, whoever out there is raising money, or like even if you're looking for, like opportunities in this space, hopefully we're the one that's ready to get this funding. So again, if you were to remember anything from the session, well, I think obviously me and my team, we breathe and live, like things about Taiwan, but we want to think about, like how do we really be from here, but for the world? How do we really position ourselves, especially with the supply chain? Is our industry ready? Is our talent ready? And also remembers that it's a difficult time, but there is still abundance out there. So keep low, keep your head down, and just kind of like work on things. And also, I think it's very important during this difficult time that people first, care about the people around you in your team, your family, obviously, your friends overseas, and we'll get through this together. Obviously, the world doesn't end that often. So I don't know how I'm doing with time, because obviously I completely ignore my group chat with my team. Hopefully we're going okay. But I guess now we're gonna go into some question session. So I don't know if Penelope is okay with.
Yes, I'm all set.
All right, all right.
There was some accidents with my computer. Hopefully it will keep safe until the end.
All right, let's see. Do we have more questions on Slido?
We definitely do have quite a lot, and most people
Wow.
are interested about. This is gonna be
Oh my God, so many questions.
Okay, listen. So the first question that most people are curious about is how is the COVID-19 affecting Anchor Taiwan's business currently and in the future, positively or negatively? Ooh.
Yeah, great question. Well, obviously we were impacted quite a lot. I would say maybe not so much in a positive or negative way per se, but as you can imagine, like the core of our thing, a lot of that is about bringing entrepreneurs from around the world and investors and tech professionals and so on and so forth to Taiwan, right? Now it's not even possible, with the border control, and also the situations in the US and Europe obviously are still not ready for that. So very quickly, like as I mentioned, the whole February I was on the road doing road shows and also speaking and hosting events, mostly in North America. But very quickly, we actually decided to postpone our cohorts. So originally, we were really excited about this year because with the US-China trade war, the situation in Hong Kong, we're seeing great opportunities for Taiwan. There's a lot of like actual interest from around the world, both from the manufacturing sort of like supply chain sector, but also talents from around the world. They're looking at this place, and I kind of feel like this is it. Like 2020 is the year for Taiwan. But obviously February very quickly, and I'm super thankful obviously for our government to take swift action right away, like border control and everything. So things here were relatively under control. But then February, quickly, because of the nature of our program, we couldn't risk kind of like going into all of the planning and capital commitment and so on and so forth while having to last minute cancel or postpone. So in February, and if you follow our Facebook, you will see an open letter from me basically announcing that we decided to postpone our cohorts. Originally, we had one big cohort in May with our program partners, DigiTimes, among other amazing partners along the supply chain. And you have no idea, all of this were done and organized already, like Withstrong, like Tech Design, MyTub, Mighty Nets, all of this were even like schedule everything. But quickly, we reach out to them and say, hey, like with the situation, we're going to postpone. So we postponed together initially kind of like because originally we were going to have this global supply chain summit with DigiTimes, but then we postponed together to 1st October and then November. But now it seems like we have to further postpone that to probably spring next year. So obviously we need to reposition, especially given that it's still uncertain how much longer this is going to last. And even if Taiwan is doing completely okay, unfortunately, this is really, the perfect case to remember and to remind ourselves that it doesn't matter, even if we are doing perfectly fine, the whole world, the economy, and the fact that Taiwan relies so much on export, is just impossible for us to be okay ourselves. So yeah, so program wise, we're gonna essentially expect earliest we might have something maybe last minute or ad hoc, maybe around mid Taipei, but then basically when we decided in February, we have pretty much kind of like almost write that out, almost kind of like put that out there to next year, so that we can focus on other things that still worthwhile our attention and our time. Originally this year, we also have some big overseas roadshows. Originally, the next one coming up is in June. Now it doesn't look likely. A lot of events that we scheduled and planned were canceled or postponed already. So that's on the program side. However, the team, we have actually been pretty busy. So obviously, as a lot of people can imagine, we are moving a lot of things online. This is obviously the first online events that we involve our communities to be with us. But then we're spending a lot of time thinking about with our mission to connect the world with Taiwan through entrepreneurship, with this goal to really lead this conversation, this collaboration with the world with Asia through Taiwan. Now we cannot do it physically. How do we do it? Like, how do we accumulate content, say for example, so that we can let more people know about what's going on here? So watch this space. There's gonna be something exciting coming up that we're planning on the content side. And then obviously we're still furthering a lot of partnerships and conversations with the anchor venture partner side, a lot of early stage, so like investment conversations, and also dealing with the existing sort of like portfolios and so on and so forth. So, but then overall, as I said, I think I don't really see it as kind of like net or like a huge positive or negative. I sort of like see it as neutral. And I see that I think the key is how do we take advantage of this situation? And, I kind of been keeping pretty busy with the team as well. And yeah, so I don't know if that answered the question, but.
I hope so, Brian. As a big fan of Anchor Taiwan, I was so sad to see Elisa's open later to everyone. But I do believe I have the confidence in Anchor Taiwan with their strong connections in Taiwan local entrepreneurship world. I believe we can contribute a lot more in supply chain updates. Yeah.
Yeah, another thing that I have been doing a lot, both myself and also with my team, is that we have been doing a lot of research, a lot of reading. Previously for the first 2-3 years, we basically try to bring the world here. And a lot of time we try our very best to really kind of give them the reason to come here. But I think this is also the time for me to take a deep dive into our industry as well. So reading a lot about our supply chain, about, say, for example, the automotive industry, the sector is getting a lot of attention. That's also a sector that we're very interested in. So yeah, a lot of reading, a lot of very busy actually still.
Awesome. So the next question, many people would like to know, what do you see the post-pandemic investor/startup ecosystem? Will online demo days become a mainstream, a new norm?
I don't know if it will become a main sort of stream. However, I think there are pros and cons with the online demo days. I have to say the pros is that because usually, especially for bigger demo days, you walk in and sometimes you just have no idea who the other peoples are. Sometimes, you walk in and you kind of randomly talk to people, and this person might be relevant for you. And then maybe you talk to 10 people and then 2 of them are relevant. But then with the online events, especially with what, say, for example, 500 Startup has organized, it's very easy for you to identify who you want to connect with. And it's so efficient because, basically you can search with keywords and identify who you should further set up a call or conversations. So that part I really like. However, I still think that it might be tricky, especially for cross-border businesses, for due diligence. A lot of time people still feel more comfortable, especially in the more traditional industries and traditional players, they still prefer to meet in person to, say, for example, talk about numbers. And sometimes, especially for early stage, a lot of the time you're investing in the founders. So you kind of want to be in the same room with them to kind of like feel how they are. And there are like nuances that you are able to see that you can see online. But obviously, the opposite is probably true as well. So what I see overall for the global sort of like startup ecosystem is that this whole COVID-19 situation can be a very interesting equalizer. And what I mean by that is, you know, like previously, usually like, especially for investors in Silicon Valley, and I think a lot of places, investors have this kind of biases that they prefer to invest in companies that are, you know, like close to them. You know, like in Silicon Valley, there's even the saying that is this like 2-hour radius rule. They need to be able to drive or take a flight over there for board meetings. Otherwise, you know, it's too far for them. But with this whole new normal, before, people or like investors in Silicon Valley, they might feel like, oh, you know, getting on a Zoom call with someone in Taiwan, that's kind of weird and not normal. But now it's the only way. And, you know, like they're doing that with people living next street as well. So right away, you know, like that mental kind of like block is taken out. So I think this can create interesting opportunities for non-US based entrepreneurs. So obviously, I think that it's something, especially for the entrepreneurs in the audience, something that you should take advantage of. And then for investors as well, especially, you know, like for those that come from places that are relatively, like say for example in Taiwan, I think this is actually a great time for Taiwanese investors to position themselves for the next wave.
Cool. I like the point. Yes. And so next question, someone wants to get your insight, maybe on your money. So someone say, when someone wants to present you his or her projects to get into the program funding, what's the best way to catch your attention?
Wow. The best way to catch my attention, well, I think there are two scenarios. One is you need the money right away. And the other one is you're kind of like building the relationship. Obviously, I prefer the one with the relationship building route, but you know, life, sometimes you just need to put yourself out there and then kind of like get the funding. I think for me, I care a lot about why this funder is working on what he or she is working on. So usually, you know, like I want to see the reason. I guess that's kind of like in my and in Anchor's DNA. I want to know why. I want to know, you know, in a way, it almost doesn't matter, even if it's a unicorn, if it's like something that doesn't create much meaning for me and or for the founder, it doesn't really get me excited. So the first thing is why. Like, why do you want to work on this thing? And I like founders that give me persistent sort of like updates. So say for example, previously I have actually got this kind of experience. Founders looking for angel funding basically got in touch. We first had a friendly coffee chat, not right away, like first meeting, hey, you know, like, are you ready to write this? Or like, hey, you have to make the decision in 2 days because we're closing. Not like that, but the first kind of like more friendly and relationship building kind of like approach. And what I encourage people, and this is not only in fundraising, but in any type of relationship building or business development, always think about what you can also do for the other side as well. What can you offer? What kind of value can you bring? And not just like, oh, I want to get this from that person. So I think that mentality, and very often you can tell whether this person just kind of like doesn't care about building a relationship with you. Like they just wanted that quick answer. So yeah, I think, you know, like the reason, like that motivation, whether this person has the vision to build something that is like bigger than him or herself, and also the approach. You know, think about what you can bring to the table. Why? Do your research. Why I should care about this company. At least, you know, like show me that you have done a little bit of research about our platform, what we usually look at, and so on and so forth.
Exactly. Absolutely. I think like getting funds like dating. Basically, you don't ask someone to marry you on the first date, right? And yes,
Exactly.
okay, start with why. Okay. So next question, I wonder what are the preferences of 500 startup or YC like criteria to select their portfolio companies?
Well, obviously, I cannot speak on their behalf. So I think that would be a better questions to ask, maybe for the teams there directly, or for companies that have been through. Maybe you need to ask kind of like separately. And there are actually some companies that went through both, like GitLab, if I remember right. Actually, I think there are both a 500 startup and also a YC company. So I cannot really speak on their behalf. However, I can share a little bit in terms of my observation. So what I see is that usually with YC, like the companies some of them might be even kind of like earlier stage. And it's very common to see companies sort of like pivot during the cohorts, during that three months period in Silicon Valley. Because for YC, I think what they want to see is whether you have that sort of like pivotal sort of like growth. And it's very common that companies get into the cohorts and they sort of like they talk to mentors, advisors, and so on and so forth, and then they figure something out. And then sometimes they launch their new product, maybe even like 2 weeks before the demo day. So very often the products may not be very kind of like mature yet, but usually what they will show you is even for 2 weeks or like 3 weeks or whatever, like there's this like spike in the growth or revenue or so on and so forth. So from my experience, a lot of Y6 companies, it could be super early stage. And typically these days they're raising usually average about like 2 million, maybe like 10 million pre, 12 million post type of valuation. While for 500, like remember the smaller cohorts, my experience is that a lot of the companies, they might be a little bit further ahead already. So, like maybe it's not this kind of explosive kind of like growth curve, but then they have got steady revenue. And so like my experience is that typical, like different types of founders and companies, but obviously I'm just talking from my own experience, so like looking through and talking to many companies after demo day, and that's my personal observations and sharing.
I see. Awesome. Okay. So I really like this session, but I see like there are so many questions like coming up, but I guess we are like running out of time at the moment. So perhaps last 3 questions. So the first one would be, what would like, I know we all know like Elisa came from an investment banking background. So what would you do? How would you suggest that for those VCs in Taiwan to find out more deal sources?
Okay. Well, interesting. I think there are two layers in this. I have to say, like, as I was preparing for this, and also during this whole period of time with, obviously the stock markets and oil prices and so on and so forth, it reminded me of my time on the trading floor. So for those of you who don't know, so I used to be a trader and investor for a pretty big UK hedge fund. And during the last financial crisis, I was right there, like literally. I was on the trading floor every day, seeing the markets. I witnessed Lehman Brothers collapse. And during that period of time, redemptions and like a lot of my friends getting fired, you don't really know what's gonna happen. And it's a pretty crazy period of time. And I lived through that, pretty much spent that whole period in Hong Kong. Luckily, came out okay. So this whole situation these days kind of like reminded me quite a bit of that time. And I don't know whether it's because I went through that. This time when this whole pandemic, this whole big uncertainty hits, somehow I think mentally I was kind of relatively, I wouldn't say prepared, you probably couldn't prepare, but I was kind of like relatively okay. I was like, okay, it's kind of like I have seen something kind of like this. I don't know, a lot of people are saying that this is going to be even more severe, but then I kind of feel like, okay, I know it's going to be difficult, it's going to be challenging, but we're probably going to be okay. But anyway, that's just a little bit background information to share with you. But in terms of deal flow, especially for investors in Taiwan, obviously the late stage and early stage is very different. And as I mentioned in the very beginning as well, like we're also still learning. And the reason to have this session is to create this containment for more conversations, to share our observations and our experience. But one thing, I kind of really believe that, especially for early stage, even for late stage, I used to really tell people as a trader, even back then, an investor, you only really trade two things, information and relationship. Like a lot of this kind of like news and whatever out there, it all boils down to information and relationship. And I think even for early stage is the same. So I will share one observation. Remember I mentioned, that 500 startup demo day Slack channels, there were more than 1,000 investors in that channels. And like basically people were posting self-introduction. Hey, like I'm so-and-so from this is what we look at, and so on and so forth. And then so I was so excited. I was like, great. So I went there and I posted this introduction about Anchor Taiwan and Anchor Venture Partners. I was like, hey, we're from Taiwan, blah, blah. And then I was so excited. And like, the team from 500, as I mentioned, they were super awesome. They basically had this like on Slack, you can put kind of the emoji for other people's comment. So people put like the Taiwanese flag for me, and a lot of people added that. So I was able to see that. That was great. And I was like, okay, are there other people, like from Taiwan in this channel as well? So I searched with the keyword Taiwan. Guess what? None. Like none. And I was like, how is that possible? I don't know, to be honest. Maybe because, I don't know, maybe because I don't know. Maybe because, like they had other ways to get deals. But I really would encourage, and that's also, like right away I came back to, because, we run this women in venture community. Right away I came back and said, hey, guess what? This is really cool. You're going to connect with so many other investors out there, and you can share deal flows and so on and so forth. So I actually shared that with the female investors that's in our community, and try to invite some of them into the channels. And I would love to see more of this, because like if we have more Taiwanese investors, say for example in that channels, we will have more visibility, and like people would know that, hey, guess what, there's smart money here in Taiwan as well. And in addition to money, there's like resources from the supply chain, from the manufacturing sector, from the talent, and so on and so forth, that we can also bring to the table. So I believe that VC business ultimately is people business. Like a lot of time, obviously there's like the due diligence part, the technical part, like you need maybe PhD or you need to read and to study. But then a lot of early stage building businesses, a lot of this is relationship driven. So I think kind of like putting yourself there and, like thinking about how to really just make connections, like this kind of occasions. I think this is golden opportunities for more investors in Taiwan to participate.
Awesome. So the next, before our last question, would be from Nick. Can you speak about what the investment community is feeling the next year? Do the majority of the funds seem unlikely to make new investments, or they're just claiming differently?
Well, you know what? If I were to be honest, I think one area, one place good to know about this might be, I don't know whether we have any friends. Do we have any friends from 数位时代 Business Next? If we do, please comment in the chat. I saw that recently 数位时代 Business Next, they had a few interviews with investors here in Taiwan about their views in terms of whether they're still going to invest and so on and so forth. So I think that would be a good place to go and read. Nick, I suppose this might be the Nick that I know. If this is a Nick that I know, you might not read Chinese, but Google translates. Another good place to actually get a more comprehensive view is Eric still around? Eric Fan, are you still there? I don't know if Eric is still around. Oh, yeah, Eric is still there.
Yep.
Yeah, he just woke up. Anyway, they also have this like, I think 200-page reports about sort of like both the global environment and also particularly, I believe, the ecosystem here in Taiwan as well. So first of all, I think those two places probably will be good places to start. And coming back to your question, frankly, man, I wish I knew. I would say there are probably multiple forces in this. Taiwan, our investors, especially the older ones, are known to be already relatively more conservative. So with this whole global uncertainty, I think it might be, like still challenging to change that. However, I do see more and more, like basically the second generation, younger generation, and sometimes even the parents they realize the importance of especially working more with startups to get this cutting edge technology. Essentially, it's kind of like, hey, get your sort of like monitor out there to understand what's going on in the world. But I have to say, because Taiwan, especially so far, has been doing relatively okay when it comes to containing this whole pandemic situation. So economy-wise, even though, as I mentioned earlier, because of our huge reliance on export, we're still going to be hit. But I think some businesses, at least, like some corporates, I'm actually seeing quite a few in the especially manufacturing sector doing still very well. So those people probably will be relatively well positioned to deploy, or if they want, at least, if they could switch their mindsets. But this is an area that I think, like we will continue to work on. And I think for us, one of our very important mission is to really convey what we see in Silicon Valley and the rest of the world, and come back and show them, hey, you can do this too. Like for me, for the team here in Anchor, for our community, guess what? It's okay. Let's try this together. So obviously, we're gonna try to convince more of them, even during this very tricky and challenging time. But time will tell.
Awesome. So the last question from Sonia, I like it. Do you, Elisa, expect a shift towards investment in certain services or industries as a result of pandemic? And what would that be?
Yeah, well, definitely. However, I have to say, obviously, like with this whole pandemic situation, very quickly, a lot of people are rushing into telehealth, remote digital health, and obviously productivity, remote working, coordination tools are very, very hot. I have to say though, I think there are two layers. One is this a long-term trend that will stick, that this sector should be invested into, and maybe it was just kind of like undervalued before. Let's say, for example, one space that I'm seeing a lot of attention that I think deserved more attention but didn't quite get before was in the ed tech sector, education technology sector. All of a sudden, all of these kids, they need this tool. And then before, a lot of time, it's not kind of like the sexiest sort of like sector, unless, I guess, unless you put your AI or whatever. But usually in the mainstream, that's a very, I would say, underrepresented sort of like sector. So I think for those sectors that I think deserve long-term attention and investments, especially for the ones that means a lot for us, like education, like our food security, like the way that we work and travel and so on and so forth. I think we're going to shift into that new normal, and we're still figuring out what that would look like. Like basically, is this going to really be the norm? Like, do we expect, how soon can we even resume traveling? And even when we travel, I think that people's interaction and everything will become very different. However, I do want to say that I'm not a big fan of jumping into something just because, oh, wow, now there's this huge demand, so you jump into that. I believe in looking at the longer term, sort of like actual demand for the world and actual need. So yeah, but then long story short, to answer the question, definitely.
All right, awesome. So before we move forward to our next session, I would like to take a group picture with every one of you. We love to see your faces. Please turn on your camera.
Let me see. How many people? Well, I think we have, what, about 45 people here online with us. Wow, Pin is out. Yay! Who else? Well, I didn't get to see you because I was focusing on, like talking into the mic. We have Brian. Oh, Brian, whoa, are you dialing in from the States? Wow, yeah, hey, so awesome to see you. Oh, all right, so, yeah. Well, I guess I'll let Penelope. We have David.
Wow, we have 3 pages.
You have, please turn on your camera. Don't be shy.
Davishan.
Now it's my opportunity to see you because I couldn't see you just now.
Yeah, Davishan, Beatrice, we love to see you. Ellen.
Wait, did I see James? Hey, James. James from our cohort, not the James in the team. Hey, James. Fantastic.
Hey, James.
Wow, Michelle who? Hey, hello. All right, are we ready for the pictures?
Let's wait for a little bit for everyone turning on their camera, please. Reza, Olivia, Priya, Elena. Well, okay, maybe they're just
Yeah.
busy.
Well,
Okay.
yeah, or they're just shy. Let's take our picture anyway. And I have my one. Finally, like I finished my session, and
Cool.
now it's
Okay,
time for me
guys,
to.
we have 3 pages, so you need to hold your smile until we take all those 3, okay? So the first page, okay? Is James or Elisa going to take one? This is my turn.
Well, I guess if you have a drink, feel free to raise your glass. Yay! All right. Okay, I see another page here. Who do we have here? Yay! Ellen, what are you drinking? You're drinking the sake. Where's my? That's my sake? Great, good to know. Fantastic, great. All right, so well, basically, in case you don't know, we actually limited the number of people who could participate in the Zoom session so that we can facilitate the breakout rooms better for you to connect with each other. So there are actually people who are watching probably during the live stream session. So we're going to turn off the live streaming so that you get to enjoy that exclusive and private breakout session experience. Before we do that, why don't we say bye to our friends online, and then we're gonna turn back into our own exclusive session. So let's say bye all together for our friends and supporters online. Stay safe out there, and please feel free to stay in touch with us on Facebook event page if you want to meet other people. And also, we're gonna set up a Slack channel as well, inspired by 500. So you might actually get an email from us with an exclusive VIP invitation to be the first to try out the Slack channel experience. All right, wait, hold on. All right, let's say bye. Yay! All right, bye guys. Let's see.